asks me, I know what it is. If I wish to explain it to him who asks, I do not know.
Yeah. St. Augustine of Hippo. What is that, 4th century CE?
Yeah, exactly. And it is, hands down, the most perfectly frustrating summation of humanity's relationship with reality.
Yeah.
Because he was talking about time.
Right. It really is the ultimate paradox, isn't it?
It is. And I want to start this deep dive by asking you, the listener, to try something right now. If you're driving, keep your eyes on the road, obviously. But if you're sitting somewhere safe, just close your eyes for a second.
Okay, I'm doing it too.
Good. Now, I want you to try to hold the raw, isolated concept of time in your mind. And I don't mean looking at your watch. I don't mean thinking about your schedule or the memory of what you had for breakfast or like the anxiety of that meeting you have tomorrow.
Strip all of that away.
Right. Try to perceive time itself.
It creates this almost immediate sense of vertigo. Because the moment you try to isolate it, it dissolves.
Completely dissolves. You realize you can't touch it, you can't weigh it in a lab somewhere, you can't look at it under a microscope.
It doesn't emit light. It doesn't have a color.
No texture. Nothing. We talk about it constantly, right? We save it, we spend it, we waste it, we kill it. We describe it as flowing, like a river.
But nothing actually flows into it. Nothing flows out.
Exactly. It feels like we are on this relentless conveyor belt moving from the past into the future, and yet we can never, ever step off that conveyor belt to check the machinery.
Yeah, we are entirely submerged in it,
Yeah.
which makes objective observation nearly impossible. I mean, it is the ultimate invisible cage.
Yeah.
And that vertigo you mentioned, that feeling of being unmoored when you look too closely at the fabric of your own existence, is very real.
Oh, totally.
Thinking about the fundamental nature of time can trigger a genuine existential panic.
Which is exactly why we need to establish a very specific ground rule for our conversation today.
A survival rule.
Basically, yeah. Because we are going to deconstruct reality today. We are going to look at relativity, quantum mechanics, the architecture of the human brain, ancient philosophy. We are going to completely dismantle the clock.
But we're going to do it gently.
Yes, I want to explicitly invite you to just, be calm.
Yeah. Settle in. Take a deep breath.
Let the paradoxes wash over you. If a concept feels like it's breaking your brain, don't fight it, just observe the break. There is, after all, absolutely no hurry.
We have all the time in the world.
Or at least whatever time is.
Right. And a logical place to begin dismantling the clock is long before anyone had actually built one.
Makes sense.
Before atomic clocks, before GPS satellites, particle accelerators. If we rewind to the ancient world, human beings had to rely on pure, naked observation.
Just looking at the sky.
Exactly. They looked at the sun, they looked at the seasons, they looked at their own aging bodies, and they tried to deduce the mechanics of this invisible force.
And the first major philosophical collision happens in ancient Greece around, 500 BCE?
Roughly.
You have two thinkers who look at the exact same universe and come to violently opposite conclusions. The first is Heraclitus of Ephesus.
Right, the river guy.
The river guy. He's the one who gave us the metaphor that almost every human culture still uses natively today. He described time as a river.
His famous assertion is that you cannot step into the same river twice, for fresh waters are always flowing in.
It's so poetic.
It is, but Heraclitus wasn't just being poetic. He was making a radical claim about physics and ontology. He argued that reality isn't a collection of static objects that occasionally undergo changes.
Okay.
Reality is fundamentally the process of change itself. It's an endless state of becoming.
So in his view, the universe is just a verb, it's an action.
Precisely. For Heraclitus, time isn't a container that holds events. Time is the flux. The burning of the fire, the flowing of the water, the growing of the tree. That change is the only fundamental truth of the cosmos.
And, that intuitively makes sense to anyone who has ever watched a log burn down to ash. But then, almost concurrently, Parmenides of Elea enters the chat and basically says, Heraclitus, you are hallucinating.
He really did.
Parmenides argues that change, all change, everywhere, is a complete illusion.
And we shouldn't dismiss Parmenides as just a contrarian. His logic is actually incredibly rigorous and really difficult to defeat.
Wait, really? How?
Well, Parmenides started with a foundational premise. He said what is exists and what is not cannot exist. He argued that absolute non-being or true nothingness is a logical impossibility.
Okay, I follow that. Like a vacuum isn't nothing, it's a vacuum. True nothingness can't have properties.
Right, so follow his logic on change. For an object to change, it has to become something it currently is not.
Okay.
A green leaf must become a brown leaf. which means the greenness must cease to exist. It must vanish into nothingness.
Oh, I see where this is going.
And the brownness must emerge from nothingness. But if nothingness cannot exist, then things cannot emerge from it or vanish into it. Therefore, Parmenides concluded, the change your eyes report to you must be a sensory trick. Reality, at its deepest level, is a single, unchanging, eternal, timeless whole.
I mean, I understand the mechanical logic, but my brain completely rejects the premise.
Because of daily experience.
Yeah, and because it feels like a linguistic trick. He's demanding that greenness is a physical object that has to go somewhere, rather than just the state of atoms reflecting light.
Fair point.
But even if we know modern chemistry proves him wrong about the leaf, he's poking at a terrifying question. How does the universe iterate? Like, how does moment A mechanically become moment B?
And that tension between the undeniable experience of change and the logical problem of how change is mechanically possible, that sets the stage for Plato and Aristotle.
Right.
Plato tried to bridge the gap with a deeply melancholy, almost beautiful compromise. In a text called the Timaeus, he describes time as a moving image of eternity.
A moving image of eternity. That is a gorgeous phrase. How did he justify it?
Well, Plato believed that the true reality was a realm of perfect, abstract forms. Think of the concept of a perfect circle, or absolute justice, or ultimate beauty.
The ideal versions of things.
Exactly. In this higher realm, these things are perfect. And because they are perfect, they cannot change. Any change to perfection would be a degradation. So the highest reality is timeless and eternal.
Which sounds exactly like Parmenides' unchanging whole.
Yes, but Plato acknowledges that we don't live in that perfect realm. We live in the material world, which is a flawed, messy, chaotic shadow of that perfection.
We're stuck in the dirt.
Right. We can't achieve eternity. So what's the next best thing? Repetition, cycles. The sun rises and sets. The seasons turn. We live, we die. New generations are born.
So we just spin our wheels.
Time, for Plato, is just the flawed material world running in circles, trying to mimic the stillness of eternity without ever actually achieving it. Time is the symptom of our imperfection.
That is incredibly poetic, but it doesn't give me a mechanism, it gives me a philosophy.
No, it doesn't.
It takes his student, Aristotle, to drag the concept of time out of the heavens and basically bolt it to the ground. Aristotle was an empiricist. He rejected the realm of perfect forms and looked at the dirt.
And he defined time in a way that sounds almost like an engineer's manual. He called time simply the measure of motion.
It is a profoundly pragmatic definition. Aristotle is saying that time is not a thing in itself. You can't have a jar of time.
Right.
Time is strictly a relational property. It is the numerical calculation of change with respect to before and after.
Like a ruler.
Yes, exactly like a ruler.
But hold on, if time is strictly the measure of motion, Aristotle's definition creates a massive trapdoor.
Oh, it really does.
Because what happens if the motion stops? Imagine we zoom out to the entire cosmos and suddenly every single atom, every photon, every galaxy just freezes perfectly in place.
A little stasis.
Nothing moves, nothing decays, nothing vibrates. If time is just the measuring stick for motion, does time itself cease to exist in that frozen universe? According to Aristotle, absolutely yes. Without physical change, there is no time. The two are inextricably linked.
Wow.
And he took it one step further, which is where it gets really weird. If time is a measure, then measuring is an action. It's a cognitive process.
Oh, yeah.
So Aristotle posed a question. If there were no minds in the universe to count the motion, would time still exist?
Oh man, so he's asking if time is dependent on a conscious observer. That sounds like early quantum physics.
That's remarkably prescient. He was introducing the idea that time might not be a physical property of the universe at all, but a biological or cognitive tool used by living creatures to sequence events.
And when you look at how early humans sequenced events, it was entirely dependent on tracking physical motion. We didn't invent time out of thin air, we deduced it from our environment.
The sun and the stars.
Right. And I found this detail in the deep dive sources about the Antikythera mechanism absolutely fascinating.
It is one of the most stunning archaeological discoveries in human history.
Sponge diver found it, right?
Yeah, in a shipwreck off a Greek island in 1901. It dates back to around the 2nd century BCE. It's essentially an ancient analog computer. It consists of dozens of intricately meshed bronze gears.
And what blew my mind is that it wasn't a clock in the way we think of clocks. It didn't track hours or minutes, it tracked the cosmos.
Yes, you would turn a crank, and the gears would calculate the exact position of the sun, the phases of the moon, eclipses, and the planetary orbits. It was a mechanical model of the sky.
Which proves Aristotle's point. Their entire concept of time was literally the physical motion of the planets.
Entirely linked to physical reality.
And that reliance on physical environment is still baked into our technology today in ways we don't even notice. Like if you look at an analog clock or a smartwatch with an analog face, why do the hands move clockwise? Why do they arc from left to right across the top of the dial?
Most people would just say, well, because that's how clocks work.
Right, but why? It's because the earliest mechanical clocks were designed to mimic sundials.
Of course.
And the civilizations that standardized timekeeping, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, they were all in the northern hemisphere. In the northern hemisphere, as the sun arcs across the southern sky from east to west, the shadow cast by a sundial's gnomon moves left to right. It sweeps clockwise.
So it's just mimicking a shadow.
Exactly. If civilization had standardized timekeeping in the southern hemisphere, like in Australia or Argentina, the shadow moves the opposite way. Our clocks today would likely run counterclockwise.
That is wild. It's a perfect illustration of how our deepest, most invisible conceptual frameworks are tethered to the arbitrary physical mechanics of our local environment.
Yeah. So antiquity leaves us with this heavy reliance on motion and the sky. But as humanity progresses into the medieval and Enlightenment eras, the conversation shifts.
We move from the physical to the metaphysical.
Right. We stop asking just how to measure the shadows, and we start asking where the framework of time actually resides. Is it a psychological illusion? Is it in the mind of a divine creator? Or is it a fundamental invisible grid that the universe is built upon?
And to explore that, we have to return to St. Augustine. We open with his quote about not knowing what time is.
Right.
But Augustine actually spent a massive amount of intellectual energy trying to figure it out in his work, Confessions. And his conclusion essentially internalized the entire universe.
He looked at the past, present, and future, and he realized our grammar tricks us. Like, we use nouns, we talk about the past like it's a country you could visit if you just had a fast enough car.
Yes, a physical destination.
But Augustine pointed out the brutal truth. The past does not exist. It's gone.
And the future. The future doesn't exist either. It hasn't happened.
So all that physically exists is the present. But when Augustine tried to measure the present, it vanished.
How so?
Well, if the present has duration, say, a minute long, well, part of that minute is already in the past and part is in the future. So the true present must be a razor-thin, zero-duration boundary between what was and what will be. It's just a mathematical point.
Yeah.
But how can we experience a life inside a zero-duration point?
Augustine's solution to this paradox is absolutely brilliant. He argued that time is not a feature of the physical world at all. Time exists entirely within the human mind. He proposed the concept of the three presents.
Walk me through this, because this idea forces a complete rewiring of how you think about your own memories.
Augustine said it is inaccurate to say there is a past, a present, and a future. Instead, he argued, there is a present of past things, a present of present things, and a present of future things.
Okay, so if I'm remembering my high school graduation, I am not visiting the past.
Exactly. The past is not a place holding your graduation. Instead, your mind is currently, in this exact zero-duration present moment, actively generating an image. The active memory is a present tense activity. That is the present of past things.
Mind-blowing. And the present of future things is just me sitting here right now generating anxiety about a dentist appointment tomorrow. The appointment isn't real yet, only my present expectation of it is real.
Yes. Memory, attention, and expectation. All three exist simultaneously right now in your consciousness.
And without the mind.
Without a mind to hold those three states together, time does not exist. The universe would just be a series of disconnected, vanishing instants. The mind is the glue.
That makes perfect sense on a psychological level, but it creates a massive theological headache for the thinkers who came after him.
It really did.
If time is just the human mind stretching itself out to comprehend change, what does that mean for an omniscient, all-powerful God? Medieval theologians like Thomas Aquinas and Boethius had to figure out how God relates to this psychological glue.
The central trap they were trying to avoid was anthropomorphizing God.
Making him too human.
Right. If God experiences time the way we do, waiting for the future to happen, or remember what he did yesterday, it implies that God is subject to change. And in classical theology, God is perfect, and perfection cannot change. Furthermore, if God is waiting for the future, it means God is bound by time, which makes time more powerful than God.
Right, and you also have the classic atheist trap question from that era, which was, what was God doing before he created the universe?
Which Augustine had already brilliantly deflected by stating that there was no before.
Wait, really?
Yes. God didn't create the universe inside a pre-existing temporal container. God created time along with the universe. Time is a property of creation.
Which, ironically, maps perfectly onto modern astrophysics. If you ask a physicist what happened before the Big Bang, they will tell you the question is grammatically nonsensical, because space-time itself was generated in the Big Bang. Asking what's before the Big Bang is like asking what is north of the North Pole. The geometry just doesn't exist.
Exactly, the parallel is striking. So, to solve the problem of God's experience, Aquinas and Boethius developed the concept of the eternal now. They argued that God exists entirely outside the framework of time. God does not experience sequence.
So he just sees it all at once.
Yes, God comprehends the entirety of the timeline, from the Big Bang to the heat-death of the universe, in a single, simultaneous, eternal gaze. They called it the specious presence of God.
From this divine vantage point, the construction of the pyramids, your current moment listening to this audio, and the final extinguishing of the last star in the cosmos are all happening now.
It's all laid out flat.
It's the ultimate cosmic drone shot. But as humanity moves into the scientific revolution, scientists start pulling time away from theology and trying to make it mathematically useful. We need to calculate the trajectory of cannonballs and the orbits of comets. And for that, we need Isaac Newton.
Yes, in 1687, Newton publishes the Principia Mathematica, and it is arguably the most important scientific book ever written.
It changed everything.
It did. But to make his equations of motion work, Newton required a rigid, unmoving backdrop. He needed to establish that time and space were absolute.
Newton argued that time is a fundamental, invisible container. It flows equably, uniformly, and without regard to anything happening inside the universe.
Yes, he called it absolute time. Even if the universe were completely empty, no planets, no stars, no atoms, Newton believed that absolute time would still tick away in the void.
It's the ultimate empty theatrical stage. The stage doesn't care if actors are performing a tragedy or a comedy, and the stage doesn't disappear if the theater is empty. It's just there. And honestly, I understand why this view dominated for over 2 centuries. It is deeply comforting.
Why does it comfort you?
Because it validates human intuition. We all walk around assuming that there is a universal master clock. If I snap my fingers right now, I assume that exact moment corresponds to a simultaneous now on the moon and a simultaneous now in the Andromeda galaxy. Newton gave us a universe that was synchronized, predictable, and manageable.
But not everyone agreed with him. His contemporary, the German philosopher and mathematician Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, found the idea of absolute time philosophically repulsive.
I read the correspondence between Leibniz and Newton's proxy, Samuel Clarke, and Leibniz is vicious. He essentially calls Newton's absolute container absurd. What was Leibniz's counterproposal?
Leibniz championed relational time. He argued that time is nothing more than the order of successive events. It is the relationship between things happening. To say that event A happened before event B just means they possess a certain logical sequence.
So if Newton's time is the stage, Leibniz is saying there is no stage. There are only the actors interacting.
Exactly. And Leibniz used a brilliant thought experiment to dismantle Newton's absolute time. He asked, imagine if God decided to create the exact same universe with the exact same history, but he shifted the entire timeline 5 minutes earlier in absolute time. Would anyone notice?
No, because the distances between the events and the causal relationships between the events would remain completely identical. Your alarm clock still rings at the same relative moment your eyes open.
Right. And Leibniz argued that in philosophy and physics, if there is no observable or mathematical difference between two states, then there is no meaningful distinction between them. The 5-minute shift changes nothing, which proves that the absolute container doesn't exist. Time is just the web of relationships. If there are no events, there is no time.
It's Aristotle all over again. If nothing changes, time stops. But this debate between the absolute stage and the relational web raged for generations. Until the late 18th century, when Immanuel Kant stepped in and proposed something so radically bizarre that it kind of synthesized the whole debate by throwing the universe out the window.
Kant executed what he called his Copernican revolution in philosophy. For centuries, thinkers assumed that our minds passively observe the external world. Kant argued the exact opposite. He claimed that the external world conforms to the structure of our minds.
He argued that time isn't out there in the world at all, not as a stage and not as a web of events.
Kant proposed that time, along with space, is the fundamental software of human intuition. It is the operating system of consciousness.
Okay, I really need you to break this down because my instinct is to reject this. If a tree falls in the woods, it falls in a sequence, regardless of whether a human operating system is there to perceive it, right?
Kant would argue that you are misunderstanding what the world actually is. Kant divided reality into two realms: the noumenal world, things as they actually are in themselves, and the phenomenal world, which is things as we experience them. Kant argued that we have zero access to the noumenal world.
We can't see base reality.
Exactly. Raw reality is unknowable. All we receive is a chaotic blast of sensory data.
Photons hitting the retina, sound waves hitting the eardrum.
Right. And if that data just flooded your brain raw, it would be incomprehensible noise. Your mind needs a sorting mechanism to make sense of the noise. Kant argued that space and time are the native filing cabinets of the mind. Your consciousness automatically takes that raw data and stamps it with a spatial coordinate where it is, and a temporal coordinate when it is relative to other data.
So time is the lens through which I'm forced to look at reality, but it doesn't belong to the reality itself.
Yes. If you wear rose-tinted glasses permanently fused to your face, you will perceive the whole world as pink. But the world isn't pink. The pinkness is a property of your lenses. Kant is saying time is the pink lens. We cannot perceive a timeless world because our processing equipment requires sequence to function.
That is a staggering claim. It renders time entirely subjective, a biological hallucination necessary for survival. And what's wild is that while philosophers debated this, the practical world just ignored it. The Industrial Revolution happened, trains needed schedules. We built an entire global civilization based on Newton's absolute rigid clock. Everything made sense.
Until 1905.
The earthquake. A 26-year-old patent clerk in Bern, Switzerland, looking at the mathematics of electromagnetism, completely shatters Newton's absolute stage, Albert Einstein.
The publication of Special Relativity is the moment our intuitive, comfortable relationship with time dies permanently.
And it all starts not with clocks, but with light. Walk me through the thought process. Because the math Einstein used wasn't insanely complex. It was his willingness to accept a terrifying logical conclusion that made him a genius.
It begins with a crisis in physics regarding the speed of light. Experimental physicists in the late 19th century had discovered that the speed of light in a vacuum is stubbornly constant, roughly 300,000 kilometers per second. It interchanges. But this completely broke Newtonian mechanics.
Because in Newton's world, speeds are always additive. They are relative to the observer. If I am standing on the side of the tracks and a train goes by at 100 miles an hour, I measure its speed at 100. If someone on the roof of that train throws a baseball forward at 50 miles an hour, I don't see the ball moving at 50. I add the speeds. I see the ball moving at 150 miles an hour.
It is entirely intuitive. But light refuses to behave this way. Imagine you are in a spaceship zooming toward me at half the speed of light. You turn on headlights. According to Newton, I should see that light beam traveling at 1.5 times the speed of light.
Because it's a moving platform.
Right, but I don't. I measure the beam hitting me at exactly 300,000 kilometers per second.
And from your perspective, inside the ship, moving incredibly fast, you also measure the headlights moving away from you at exactly 300,000 kilometers per second.
Yes. No matter how fast you move toward or away from a light source, the light always reaches you at the exact same speed. This creates a devastating paradox. Speed is simply distance divided by time. If the speed of light absolutely cannot change for two observers who are moving at radically different velocities, then the only way the equation balances is if the distance they measure and the time they experience change.
The light is constant, so space and time have to bend to accommodate it.
Exactly. Einstein realized that time is not an absolute unmoving container. Time is relative. The faster you move through space, the slower you move through time relative to a stationary observer. This is time dilation.
And this isn't just a mathematical abstraction. It leads to the most famous thought experiment in physics, the twin paradox.
Imagine identical twins, Alice and Bob. Bob stays on Earth. Alice gets into a rocket ship capable of traveling at 99% the speed of light, and she flies to a star 5 light years away, turns around and comes back.
Okay, stop there, because this is where my brain always rebels. For Alice, inside the ship, does she feel like she is moving in slow motion? Do her thoughts slow down?
Not at all. From Alice's perspective, inside her local reference frame, time feels perfectly normal. Her watch ticks once a second, her heart beats normally, she pours a cup of coffee, and it pours at normal speed. The laws of physics work identically in any inertial frame of reference.
But from Bob's perspective on Earth, watching her through an impossibly powerful telescope?
Bob sees Alice moving in extreme slow motion. He sees her clock ticking, once for every 10 ticks of his clock. But here is the crux of the paradox. Velocity is relative. From Alice's perspective, she is stationary in her ship, and Bob and the Earth are zooming away from her at 99% the speed of light. So Alice looks back at Earth and sees Bob moving in extreme slow motion.
Wait, if they both see each other moving in slow motion, what happens when she lands? Who is actually older? They can't both be older.
When Alice decelerates, turns around, and accelerates back to Earth, she breaks the symmetry. She changes reference frames. And the mathematics of relativity dictate that when she steps out of the ship on Earth, she is biologically younger than Bob. Much younger. Bob might be an old man with gray hair, while Alice has only aged a few years.
So we have to make this absolutely clear to the listener. This is not science fiction. This isn't a mechanical trick where the gears of a clock get jammed by G-forces. This is biological reality. Her cells divided fewer times. Her metabolism processed fewer calories.
Yes, she literally experienced less time than Bob, and we have proven this empirically. In 1971, physicists conducted the Hepfield-Keating experiment. They took 4 incredibly precise cesium atomic clocks, left reference clocks at the U.S. Naval Observatory, and flew the others around the world on commercial airliners.
And when they landed, the flying clocks were behind. They had ticked fewer times?
Only by fractions of a microsecond, because commercial jets move very slowly compared to the speed of light. But the discrepancy precisely matched Einstein's equations. Time is elastic.
But it raises a deeply weird philosophical question. If Alice comes back and Bob is 40 years older, is Alice technically a time traveler? Did she travel into Earth's future? Or did she just experience reality in slow motion?
From the perspective of physics, she traveled into Earth's future. She departed in 2026, experienced a few years of subjective life, and arrived back on Earth in 2066. She skipped 40 years of Earth's timeline. Forward time travel is an undeniable fact of nature. It just requires immense amounts of energy to achieve significant leaps.
And just when physicists were recovering from the shock of special relativity, Einstein spends 10 more years working on gravity. In 1915, he drops general relativity. He proves that velocity isn't the only thing that bends time. Mass does too.
Gravity is not a mysterious invisible tether pulling objects together. Gravity is the curving of space-time by mass. Imagine a bowling ball resting on a trampoline. It creates a dip. A heavy planet creates a dip in the fabric of space-time. And Einstein proved that the deeper you are in a gravitational well, the slower time passes relative to someone further out.
Meaning that time passes slower on the surface of the Earth than it does out in deep space.
Yes, which means your feet are aging infinitesimally slower than your head, because your feet are closer to the center of the Earth's mass. A clock on the floor ticks slower than a clock on the ceiling.
It sounds absurd, but again, the research points out that our modern civilization would collapse without accounting for this. I'm talking about GPS.
The Global Positioning System is the ultimate proof of relativity. We have a constellation of satellites orbiting the Earth. They transmit time signals to the receiver in your phone, and your phone calculates its position based on how long it takes those signals to arrive. To get an accurate position down to a few meters, the clocks on those satellites have to be accurate to billionths of a second.
But the satellites are subject to both of Einstein's theories simultaneously.
Exactly. First, the satellites are moving very fast relative to the ground, about 14,000 kilometers per hour. So, special relativity says their clocks should tick slower than ours by about 7 microseconds a day.
But they're also 20,000 kilometers up in the air, meaning they're experiencing much less of Earth's gravity than we are.
Right, so general relativity says their clocks should tick faster than ours by about 45 microseconds a day.
You combine the two, and the satellites are running 38 microseconds fast every single day.
If engineers did not program the satellite computers to deliberately slow down their clocks to compensate for relativistic time warp, the GPS system would fail completely. The navigational errors would accumulate at a rate of 10 kilometers per day. Google Maps would be entirely useless within 24 hours. Relativity is running in your pocket right now.
Remember to breathe, everyone. Because if you take this gravitational time dilation to its absolute logical extreme, you arrive at the most terrifying objects in the cosmos: black holes.
A black hole is a region where mass is collapsed into such a dense singularity that the curvature of space-time becomes infinite. The gravitational well is so deep that not even light can escape its event horizon.
So what happens to time at the edge of a black hole?
If you were safely orbiting a black hole at a vast distance, and you watched a probe fall toward it, you would see gravitational time dilation in extreme effect. As a probe got closer to the event horizon, you would see its clock slow down. Eventually, as it reached the exact boundary of the event horizon, its clock would appear to stop completely. To an outside observer, the probe would be frozen in time forever, slowly fading to red as the light stretched out.
But from the probe's perspective,
From the probe's local reference frame, it feels no slowing of time at all. It crosses the event horizon and falls to its destruction in a matter of seconds. But if it could somehow look backward out at the rest of the universe, it would see the entire future history of the cosmos play out in fast forward.
it is deeply unsettling. Take a breath here, because it forces us into a philosophical corner that leads directly into our next paradigm. If time is completely relative, if my now is different from a satellite's now and radically different from the probe's now, then the idea of a universal shared present moment is a myth.
That's right.
The past, present, and future must all exist simultaneously depending on your reference frame.
This brings us to what physicists call the block universe, or the philosophical stance known as eternalism. And this is another moment where we must ask the listener to hold their reality lightly.
Because the block universe murders the concept of free will. Let's unpack it. How does relativity demand a block universe?
It comes down to the relativity of simultaneity. In Newtonian physics, if two firecrackers go off at the same time, everyone in the universe agrees they went off at the same time. But under Einstein, two observers moving at different speeds will fundamentally disagree on the order of events. Observer A might say event 1 happened before event 2. Observer B, moving past them at high speed, will measure event 2 happening before event 1.
And the math says both observers are 100% correct in their own reference frames.
Yes, there is no preferred perspective. But think about what that means. If observer B can currently see an event in their present that observer A still considers to be in the future, then that future event must already exist. It has to be real in order for observer B to interact with it.
Which means the future isn't something that is being actively written right now. It's a place that is already there.
Precisely. In eternalism, space-time is viewed as a massive, rigid, four-dimensional block. It contains all of space and it contains all of time. The Big Bang is one boundary of the block. The heat-death of the universe is the other boundary. Every single event that has ever happened or ever will happen is suspended inside this block like insects trapped in amber.
I use the analogy of a DVD. The block universe is like a movie on a disc. The opening credits, the climax, and the ending all physically exist at the exact same time on the plastic surface of the disc. But human consciousness is like the laser in the DVD player. You can only read one frame at a time, creating the illusion of a flowing narrative. But the narrative is already burned onto the disc.
It is a terrifyingly accurate analogy. From the perspective of physics, your birth, your current moment listening to my voice, and your eventual death all exist equally.
Which offers this strange, cold comfort. Because it means the past isn't gone. It means my childhood still exists in its specific coordinate inside the block. It means people we've lost haven't vanished into nothingness. They're still permanently existing in their slice of space-time. We just can't communicate with them because our conscious laser has moved further down the disk.
Einstein himself took great solace in this. When his lifelong friend Michel Besso died, Einstein wrote a letter of condolence to Besso's family. He wrote, "Now he has departed from this strange world a little ahead of me. That means nothing. People like us who believe in physics know that the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion."
It's beautiful, but I struggle with the other side of that coin. If my future already exists in the block, then everything I do is predetermined. If I decide to drop my coffee mug right now, I didn't make a spontaneous choice. The shattered mug has existed in the block since the dawn of time, waiting for my conscious laser to hit that frame. The script is written.
That is the harsh determinism of the block universe. But it raises a massive, glaring question that physicists still struggle to answer. If the entire block exists at once, why does our conscious laser only move in one direction? Why don't we remember the future and guess the past? Why does the DVD only play forward?
Which introduces the arrow of time. Because as weird as relativity is, it doesn't forbid backward movement. The fundamental laws of physics are completely time-symmetric.
Yes. If you look at Newton's laws of motion or the equations of electromagnetism or even quantum wave functions, there is no preferred direction for time. The math works perfectly whether the variable t is positive or negative.
So if I film a video of a perfectly elastic collision between two billiard balls and I play the video in reverse, you wouldn't be able to tell it was reversed. The physics looks identical.
But our macroscopic reality is not symmetric. If you drop your coffee mug and it shatters on the floor, you cannot reverse the video. A shattered ceramic mug never, ever spontaneously absorbs energy from the floor and reassembles itself into a perfect cup, leaping back into your hand. Reality has a strict one-way arrow.
So where does the arrow come from? If the base code of the universe is symmetric, why is my kitchen so asymmetric?
The only law of physics that explicitly distinguishes the past from the future is the second law of thermodynamics, which deals with entropy.
Entropy is usually defined as disorder or chaos, right?
It's more accurately defined as a measure of probability and the number of possible microscopic arrangements of a system. The second law states that in any isolated system, entropy will always increase. Things naturally move from order to disorder.
This is the messy bedroom analogy. My bedroom naturally tends toward chaos over the course of a week. Clothes on the floor, books on the bed. It requires deliberate, directed energy to restore order and lower the entropy.
And even when you exert that energy, your body generates heat, which increases the overall entropy of the universe. The reason entropy always increases is pure statistical probability. Think about a jigsaw puzzle. There is exactly one arrangement of the pieces where the picture is perfect and ordered. There are billions of arrangements where the pieces are jumbled in a box. So if you shake the box, statistical probability guarantees the pieces will end up in a disordered state simply because there are vastly more disordered states available.
And atoms behave the same way. There's only one way to arrange the molecules to make a whole coffee mug, but billions of ways to arrange the shards and the spilled liquid. As the universe interacts with itself, it constantly shuffles toward more probable disordered states.
This relentless, irreversible slide toward maximum disorder provides the universe with a physical timeline. The past is low entropy. The future is high entropy. The arrow of time is just the arrow of probability.
But hold on, if the universe is constantly moving from low entropy to high entropy, that forces a wild conclusion about the origin of the universe. It implies that the Big Bang must have been a state of almost impossibly perfect order.
You have hit upon what the mathematical physicist Roger Penrose calls the problem of the Big Bang. For the universe to have a functioning arrow of time today, the initial state of the universe 13.8 billion years ago must have had an incredibly astronomically low state of entropy. It was a pristine, highly organized singularity.
Why? Do physicists know why the universe started with such low entropy?
No. It is one of the greatest unresolved mysteries in cosmology. There is no fundamental law that says the universe had to start in a highly ordered state. It is a massive statistical anomaly. Penrose calculated the odds of the universe starting with such low entropy by pure chance, and the number is 1 in 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123. It's a number so large that if you wrote a 0 on every proton in the observable universe, you still couldn't write the whole number out.
So our entire experience of time, our memory, our cause and effect is entirely dependent on this unexplained, miraculous state of order at the dawn of creation. And because of this arrow, we are dragged inexorably forward. We cannot unbreak the egg. But what about actual time travel? We established that traveling to the future is just a matter of going really fast. What does the math say about traveling to the past?
Surprisingly, the mathematics of general relativity do not explicitly forbid backward time travel. In 1949, the brilliant mathematician Kurt Gödel, a close friend of Einstein, solved Einstein's field equations for a theoretical universe that is rotating.
The actual universe isn't rotating as far as we know, but Gödel was playing with the math.
Right, and he discovered that in a rotating universe, space-time is dragged along in a circle. This creates what physicists call closed time-like curves. These are literal loops in the fabric of space-time. If you had a powerful enough spaceship, you could travel continuously forward in your own local time, follow the curve, and arrive back at a point in the global past. You could arrive before you departed.
But that instantly creates catastrophic paradoxes. The grandfather paradox. I follow the curve, I arrive in 1920, I accidentally run over my grandfather with my spaceship before my father is born, which means I am never born, which means I never fly the ship, which means my grandfather lives. The loop destroys its own cause.
Yes. The breakdown of causality is so logically offensive that most physicists assume the universe must have some unknown physical mechanism that strictly prohibits backward time travel. Stephen Hawking famously proposed the chronology protection conjecture, which essentially suggests that the laws of physics will inevitably conspire to destroy any machine capable of backward time travel before it can be used, likely via a buildup of infinite quantum vacuum energy.
The universe protecting its own timeline. But there is a theoretical loophole that avoids the paradox entirely, right? The many worlds interpretation.
If quantum mechanics operates under the many worlds interpretation, every possible outcome of a quantum event branches off into a separate parallel universe. If backward time travel is possible in this framework, you wouldn't travel to your own past. The moment you arrive in the past, you create a new, branched reality.
So I can run over my grandfather in Universe B and I'm never born in Universe B, but my origin in Universe A remains completely safe, causality is preserved, but my timeline is abandoned.
Exactly. But all of this, black holes, entropy, time travel, exists on the macro scale, the scale of stars and billiard balls. A profound shift happens when physicists try to find the fundamental gears of time. If we take a microscope and zoom all the way down into the quantum foam, past the atoms, past the quarks, trying to find the indivisible unit of time.
The ultimate tick of the cosmic clock.
Right. When physicists try to unify quantum mechanics with general relativity to understand the universe at its most fundamental microscopic baseline, they use a mathematical framework called the Wheeler-DeWitt equation. And something stunning happens in this equation.
The variable for time too completely drops out of the math.
Yes. The equation describes the quantum state of the entire universe, and it does so without any reference to time. It suggests that at the deepest, most fundamental level of reality, time simply does not exist. There is no flow. There are only quantum states.
I need an analogy here. How can time be overwhelmingly obvious to us, but not exist at the foundation of reality?
The theoretical physicist Carlo Rovelli provides the best framework for this. He argues that time is an emergent property. Think about the concept of temperature. If I hold a hot cup of coffee, the heat is a very real macroscopic phenomenon. It burns my hand. But if I zoom in on a single molecule of water inside that coffee, the molecule itself does not have a temperature. Temperature is just the statistical average of billions of molecules jiggling around. It emerges from the aggregate.
Or like the concept of wetness. A single H2O molecule isn't wet. Wetness only exists when a massive number of molecules interact with my skin.
Precisely. Rovelli's thermal time hypothesis suggests that time is like temperature. A single quantum particle doesn't experience time. But when you have trillions of particles interacting, entangling, and generating macroscopic states, the illusion of a flowing timeline emerges from their statistical blur. The river of time doesn't exist in the fundamental physics. It emerges entirely from our coarse, zoomed-out perspective.
So time is an optical illusion created by our inability to see the quantum machinery. Which means if we want to understand time, we have to stop looking at black holes and quantum equations, and we have to look directly at the hardware running the illusion, the human brain.
We pivot from physics to neuroscience. Because if time is an emergent illusion, how is the brain actively generating it moment by moment?
We talked about Augustine's present of present things, the fact that the mathematical now has zero duration, but my brain doesn't process reality in zero duration flashes. A strobe light at zero duration is just darkness.
Right. The brain needs a buffer. In cognitive psychology, this is known as the specious present. It is the duration of time that is subjectively experienced as being right now. Neurologically, your brain clumps sensory input together into a sliding window of roughly 2 to 3 seconds.
The research used a fantastic analogy regarding music. When you listen to a melody, you don't just perceive isolated notes winking in and out of existence. If you only heard the current isolated note, there would be no music.
To hear a melody, your brain must simultaneously hold the reverberation of the previous note, actively process the current note, and unconsciously anticipate the next note. It stitches these elements together into a continuous 2 to 3 second tapestry. That tapestry is the specious present. It is the metronome of human consciousness.
But the terrifying thing about human consciousness is that the tempo of this metronome is not stable. It bends, just like Einstein's spacetime. And the most universal experience of this is how time seems to accelerate as we age. When I was 8 years old, the gap between Thanksgiving and Christmas felt like a geological epoch. Now I blink in January and it's suddenly October. Entire years vanish. What is the psychological mechanism behind that?
The literature highlights 2 primary theories. The first is pure mathematics, the proportional theory. It was proposed by Paul Janet in the 19th century. When you are 5 years old, 1 year represents 20% of your entire existence. That is a massive subjective fraction. But when you are 50 years old, 1 year is only 2% of your life. Every passing year is measured against a constantly growing yardstick of accumulated memories, so each new year feels proportionally smaller and faster.
I see the mathematical logic, but it feels too passive. It implies we are just victims of a sliding fraction. The second theory feels much more mechanically accurate to how memory actually works, the novelty theory.
The novelty theory looks at how the brain encodes information. The brain is an incredibly efficient organ. It doesn't want to waste energy recording things it already knows. When you are a child, the world is radically novel. Every day involves a first. learning to ride a bike, tasting a new food, visiting a new place. Because the experiences are novel, the brain writes rich, dense, detailed neural pathways. When you look back at that period, the sheer density of the memory data makes the timeline feel incredibly long.
And as an adult, I have optimized my life into a routine. I wake up at the same time, drink the same coffee, commute on the same highway, do the same job, and watch the same shows.
Exactly. And your brain realizes it doesn't need to record the 400th time you've driven that highway. It runs on autopilot. It drops the data. So when you reach the end of the year and look back, there are very few memory markers. The brain looks at the sparse data and concludes, not much happened, so it must have been a very short period of time.
Hold on, this creates a massive opportunity. If subjective time feels shorter simply because of a lack of novel memory markers, does that mean I can literally, psychologically expand my lifespan by forcing myself into novelty?
Absolutely. It is one of the most actionable insights from the psychology of time. If you deliberately disrupt your routine travel to an unfamiliar country, learn a complex new language, pick up an instrument, force your brain to process deeply unfamiliar stimuli, you force the brain to start recording densely again. In retrospect, that year will feel significantly longer, richer, and slower. You cannot alter the physical ticking of the clock, but you have immense control over the psychological stretch of your timeline.
Which proves how incredibly plastic our internal clock is. And if we can stretch time over decades, we can also warp it in a matter of minutes. This brings us to extreme states of consciousness where the brain's temporal processing entirely breaks down.
A positive example of this is the flow state, popularized by the psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. If you observe a jazz musician improvising, or a surgeon in the middle of a complex operation, or a rock climber on a difficult wall, their self-consciousness recedes. They become entirely absorbed in the present task.
And their perception of time drastically alters. Usually it contracts. They look up, and 4 hours have passed in what felt like 20 minutes.
Neurologically, this happens because the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain responsible for self-monitoring and temporal tracking, downregulates. The brain diverts all processing power to the immediate sensory motor task. The clock tracking software simply turned off.
But the clock tracking can also break in horrific ways. The research highlights the relationship between trauma, PTSD, and time, and it frames trauma fundamentally as a temporal wound.
That is a very accurate description. A healthy brain compartmentalizes time. It knows the past is over, and it uses the past as a library to inform the present. But in severe post-traumatic stress disorder, the temporal filing system collapses. The intense emotional and physiological data of the traumatic event is not properly tagged as a past memory.
So when a trigger occurs, the person doesn't feel like they are remembering the trauma.
No, the brain's amygdala reacts as if the threat is happening right now. The boundary between the past and the present dissolves. The person is trapped in a terrifying, recurring present tense. It reveals just how fragile our everyday feeling of a steady flow really is. Linear time is not a given. It is a precarious psychological achievement.
And it's an achievement that brings us an enormous amount of anxiety. Western culture is entirely built on linear time. We view time as a straight line starting at point A and rushing toward point B. It creates this relentless pressure for progress. We constantly feel like we're running out of it. We monetize it. Time is money.
Which is why looking at Eastern philosophical traditions provides such a profound psychological antidote, because they operate on a completely different temporal architecture.
Let's start with Hindu cosmology. When I read the scale of time in the Hindu texts, it made our Western obsession with 5-year plans look absurd. They don't view time as a straight line, they view it as cyclical.
Yes, and on a scale that humbles the human imagination. In Hindu cosmology, cosmic time is measured in cycles called kalpas. A single kalpa represents one day in the life of Brahma, the creator god, and one kalpa is calculated to be 4.32 billion human years.
Which, amazingly, is incredibly close to the actual age of the Earth.
It is a stunning parallel. But within that day of Brahma, there are smaller cycles of ages called yugas. The universe cycles through golden ages of virtue and harmony, slowly degrading into darker, chaotic ages before the universe is dissolved and reborn, and the cycle begins anew.
According to the tradition, we are currently in the Kali Yuga, the final, darkest age of conflict and spiritual decline. But what struck me wasn't the pessimism of the Dark Age, it was the psychological relief of the cycle itself. If the universe resets, it completely removes the apocalyptic pressure of Western thought.
Exactly. In the West, if humanity fails, the line ends. It's an ultimate, final tragedy. In the Hindu framework, your individual life, the rise and fall of your nation, the entirety of human history, it is just a brief flicker in a vast, endlessly repeating cosmic breath. The universe has seen all of this play out 1,000,000,000 times before, and it will see it 1,000,000,000,000 times again. It invites a profound sense of detachment and calm.
And that concept of detachment leads directly into Buddhism and its core teaching regarding time, anicca, or impermanence.
The Buddha observed that the fundamental characteristic of all experienced reality is that it changes. Nothing is static. A thought arises and passes, a pain arises and passes, a mountain rises and eventually erodes.
But the Buddha didn't just point out physics, he made a psychological diagnosis. He said that human suffering dukkha is almost entirely generated by our refusal to accept impermanence.
We suffer because we cling. We experience a moment of joy, and we desperately try to freeze the clock to make it last forever. We inevitably fail, and we suffer. We look at our youth, we want to hoard it, it fades, and we suffer. We fight the flow of time instead of accepting that the flow is the only reality.
And this creates a devastating logic regarding human identity. If everything is impermanent, what about me? What is the self? The research includes this classic philosophical thought experiment, the ship of Theseus.
It's an ancient Greek paradox, but it applies perfectly to Buddhist psychology. The paradox asks, imagine the famous wooden ship of the hero Theseus is kept in a harbor as a museum piece. Over the decades, the wooden planks begin to rot. As each plank rots, it is replaced by a new, identical piece of wood. Eventually, after a century, every single original plank has been replaced. Is it still the ship of Theseus?
Physically, no. Not a single atom from the original ship remains. And if you apply that to a human being, the biology is exactly the same. Your cells are constantly dying and replacing themselves. The physical body you have today is not the physical body you had 10 years ago.
And psychologically, the beliefs, fears, and memories you had at age 10 are almost entirely absent or rewritten at age 50. So what is the permanent thread that makes you you across time?
The Buddhist answer is radical. There is no thread. The concept of a permanent, unchanging soul or self inside you is an illusion. You are a continuously flowing process. You are a verb, not a noun. You are the river.
Which aligns perfectly with the ancient Chinese philosophy of Taoism, specifically the concept of wu-wei.
Wu-wei is often translated as non-doing or effortless action. But it's not about being lazy, right? It's about how you interact with the temporal flow.
Correct. The Taoists observed that the natural world operates with an effortless rhythm. Seasons change, rivers flow, trees grow, all without anxiety or forced schedules. Human beings, however, try to impose rigid conceptual frameworks over nature. We try to dam the river. Wu-wei is the practice of aligning your actions with the natural, spontaneous flow of reality, the Tao.
It's the surfboard analogy. Western anxiety is standing in the middle of the river, trying to stop the water with your bare hands, trying to freeze the timeline. Wu-wei is building a surfboard. You recognize you cannot stop the wave, you cannot reverse the river, so you fluidly ride it. You respond to the present moment precisely as it is, without agonizing over the past or attempting to micromanage the future.
It requires immense psychological surrender. But the reward is peace. You stop treating time as a hostile resource that is slipping through your fingers, and you start treating it as the medium in which you naturally exist.
But there is one massive, undeniable obstacle to this peace. We can talk about riding the wave, but eventually the wave crashes. We cannot talk about time without talking about the fact that our time runs out. Mortality. It is the dark engine behind all of our temporal anxiety.
It is the ultimate boundary condition of human life. But ancient philosophers developed logical frameworks to disarm the terror of that boundary. The Greek philosopher Epicurus offered a brilliantly sterile, logical argument against the fear of death.
He argued that fearing death is temporally irrational.
Yes, Epicurus pointed out a simple symmetry. Where you are, death is not. And where death is, you are not. As long as you are alive and capable of experiencing fear, death is absent. And when death finally arrives, your consciousness is extinguished, meaning you are no longer present to suffer from it. You and death will never actually meet in the same moment of time.
He also pointed out the symmetry of non-existence. He basically said, you didn't exist for 13 billion years before you were born, and it didn't bother you at all. Why are you terrified of returning to that exact same state? It's pure, icy logic. But humans aren't purely logical. The Stoics had an approach that feels much more actionable for daily life.
The Stoic practice of memento mori, remember that you will die.
It sounds incredibly morbid on the surface. Why would I want to meditate on my own demise over my morning coffee?
Because the Stoics understood the psychology of scarcity. When a resource is infinite, it loses its value. If you believe you have limitless tomorrows, you will sleepwalk through today. By deliberately pulling the reality of your finite timeline into your present awareness, you create contrast. Memento mori isn't about dread, it's a technique to make the present moment hyper-vivid. Knowing the clock is ticking is exactly what makes the coffee taste so good. It forces gratitude.
And that gratitude is tied deeply to memory, because without memory, the self dissolves before the body even dies. We touched on this earlier, but the research points to the profound neurological case studies by Oliver Sacks, particularly regarding patients with severe anterograde amnesia.
These are individuals whose hippocampi have been destroyed, usually by illness, rendering them entirely unable to form new long-term memories. They retain their intelligence, but their timeline is shattered.
They are trapped in a perpetual, isolated present window of about 30 seconds. Every 30 seconds, their consciousness wipes clean.
Sacks described it as a state of profound, tragic suspension. They cannot project themselves into the future because they have no anchor in the past to push off from. They are severed from narrative time.
It proves that nostalgia, melancholy, and even deep regret, which are often painful temporal emotions, are actually privileges. Regret is the pain of a past that cannot be changed, but the ability to feel that regret is proof that your choices meant something and that your identity spans across time. Pain is the price of a continuous self.
And as we offload more of our memory to external systems, it's fascinating to see how our artificial memories also inherit our temporal limits.
This is a wild tangent from the research notes. We think of computers as mathematically perfect and immortal, but they have their own hard-coded mortality, the 2038 problem.
It is the modern equivalent of the Y2K bug, but rooted much deeper in the architecture of computing. Most computer systems, servers, and databases measure time using what is called Unix time. It is simply a running count of the number of seconds that have elapsed since midnight on January 1st, 1970.
That's the arbitrary epoch that programmers chose to start the clock.
Right. But early programmers stored this running count in a 32-bit signed integer. And a 32-bit integer has a strict mathematical maximum limit. On January 19, 2038, at 03.14.07 UTC, the clock will run out of bits. The number will overflow the container.
And when it overflows, the count flips from a massive positive number to a massive negative number.
The computers will suddenly calculate that the current date is December 13th, 1901. Unless critical legacy systems are updated to 64-bit architecture, databases will crash, financial transactions will fail, and software will completely break down. It is a stark reminder that every system created to track time, whether biological or digital, eventually hits a terminal limit.
Including the grandest system of all, the universe itself. We started this deep dive talking about the Big Bang, the birth of space-time. But how does the timeline end? The research points to a cosmological scenario known as the heat death of the universe.
Extrapolating the second law of thermodynamics, entropy will continue its irreversible march toward maximum disorder. Fast forward billions of years. The last generation of stars will burn out, the galaxies will go dark. Fast forward trillions of years. The dead stars will be swallowed by supermassive black holes.
And eventually, thanks to Stephen Hawking's calculations, we know that even black holes aren't immortal. They leak Hawking radiation.
Over googles of years, a timescale so vast it renders the word billion meaningless. The black holes will evaporate. The universe will continue to expand until matter is so diffuse that no two particles will ever interact again. The temperature of the cosmos will drop to a fraction above absolute zero. It will be a thin, uniform, dark void. Maximum entropy.
But here's the ultimate question, circling all the way back to Aristotle. Aristotle said time is the measure of motion. If the universe reaches maximum entropy and the temperature is perfectly uniform everywhere, no physical work can be done. No energy can be exchanged. Nothing will ever change again. Does time stop?
That is the ultimate philosophical intersection of physics. If nothing happens, is there time? The mathematical equations of the empty void technically continue, but the timeline is perfectly blank. There are no events to order. There is no change to measure. For all intents and purposes, time as an experiential phenomenon ceases to exist.
But remember the Eastern philosophies we discussed. If the universe eventually reaches maximum entropy where nothing ever happens again, isn't that just the ultimate state of wu-wei? The cosmos finally achieving total stillness.
That is a deeply poetic and remarkably calming way to view the apocalypse. It is not a tragedy. It is the universe releasing its tension, a cosmic exhale, the final eternal peace after the turbulence of existence.
And there are theories like eternal inflation in the multiverse, which suggest that our universe's heat death is just a local event, that new universes are constantly branching off in an infinite meta-timeline.
But for our specific reality, that quiet, dark stillness is the likely resting place of the arrow of time.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive. We started with a mission to understand humanity's single greatest mystery. What have we actually learned? Physics has completely demolished our intuitive, everyday sense of a shared master clock. We know time bends around planets, dilates at high speeds, freezes at black holes, and might be entirely absent at the quantum level.
And philosophy has dismantled our psychological comfort. We faced the determinism of the block universe, the subjective illusion of Kantian time, and the relentless one-way decay of entropy. We haven't found a definitive, simple answer.
And honestly, that is a beautiful thing. It is the gift of not knowing. Understanding that time is this strange, malleable, emergent mystery doesn't stop us from making a cup of coffee. It doesn't stop us from calling a friend or feeling the urgency of a deadline. But it allows us to hold our reality a little more lightly. It invites a necessary humility.
Before we wrap up entirely, I want to bring up one final, profound tangent from the research regarding human behavior: time capsules.
We love burying them. Every school, every World's Fair, we put newspapers, coins, and letters in a sealed box and bury it in the dirt.
To communicate with a future we know we will never survive to see. It is an act of profound, almost irrational hope. It is a physical defiance of impermanence. We are sending a message across the eons, hoping a conscious mind will be there to open it.
Now hold that thought and connect it back to the physics we discussed. The problem of the Big Bang. Roger Penrose's mystery. The incredibly, impossibly low entropy at the very start of our universe that gave us our arrow of time. What if the universe itself, with its pristine, highly ordered initial state, is just a time capsule?
Left by a previous iteration of reality.
Exactly. If the cosmos operates on cycles like the Hindu kalpas or the bouncing universe theories in physics, what if our entire existence, our entire timeline, is just a message of low entropy sent across the void from a previous universe that collapsed?
That is a staggering thought. It positions our reality not as a random accident, but as a cosmic inheritance.
It makes the mystery feel intentional. As we close this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final quote. We started with Augustine's confusion. I want to end with the Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges. He spent his life writing about labyrinths and time, and he ultimately arrived at this conclusion. He wrote, "Time is a river which sweeps me along, but I am the river."
You are not separate from the flow, standing on the bank, watching it go by. You are made of the very substance of time.
So to you listening, take one more deep breath. Stop trying to manage every second so harshly today. The clock is an illusion, the river is real. Don't fight the current. Settle in, find your calm, and just be the river. After all, if no one asks you, you already know exactly what time is.